with the numbers of these new tests coming out on the market, as you just mentioned, almost on a daily basis. Maybe you could educate our audience a little bit on, kind of the regulation of these. We know that we have the Food and Drug Administration, and they get involved certainly in drugs and devices. I think my understanding is, some different requirements there on the device side versus the drug side. This is a test. So, for a company like yours, as you develop something like this, or anyone else that's coming out, what is it that, the steps that you have to go through, maybe in just a layperson's terms, to be able to sort of get to market and, I guess, have the public, have the payers feel confident that, there's a science behind what it is that you're selling?
No, I think it's very important. And because our test does not predict something, we tend to be on the lower risk. So maybe an example would be, let's say you're having a test for cancer. Well, that's very important, because if the lab makes an error and says you don't have cancer, but you really do, that's a problem. So the regulation seems to be a little more focused on those folks going forward, that lab knows what they're doing. We're a little further down the ladder because we don't predict things. However, I think it's important, as people do look at these genetic tests, I guess, to understand where's the lab at, and does the lab itself, is it a certified lab? So, for example, we are a CLIA lab here at Genomind, which is we follow certain rules and have certain procedures to get call that license we can hang on the wall. We're also New York state approved. So the state of New York has a very robust requirements for labs that things are done correctly. So that's really where we're regulated at right now, is at the lab level and we're subject to inspection. So we have an inspection window where people will literally come in relatively unannounced and look at our procedures and look at our processes to make sure that we're operating with good lab procedures. And I like that because it's an independent body that does that. It's random. It's a surprise when they show up. So you always have to be ready. So I think it's the quality of the lab that people have to be concerned about. And I think from a business standpoint and from a patient standpoint, sometimes you'll hear it's a little like the Wild West out there, because as these tests come on the market, do you really know which lab is performing that test? And then we want to make sure they didn't mix your sample up with somebody else's.
And so is there a phase in any of this that you're subject to scientific trials, kind of like on the pharma side, where there's randomized control trials to establish efficacy or effectiveness, or is it more around, the type of regulation you just described?
That's what's evolving. To get coverage, and I can use our main competitor's example. They just released a poster, actually their randomized clinical trial results, where they used the test on some people and didn't on other, and saw an improvement in folks who used the test, which is very similar to our Aetna test. The difference there, our Aetna test was a retrospective analysis. So we're looking back because they could pull the claims files for those people. Our competitor did more of a prospective trial, so it's a randomized blinded trial, and that's where it's heading. It's a little different than drug treatment because it's, you're using a genetic test, so it's a little more unusual or difficult to do those randomized trials, but that is the future. It just, our model doesn't quite fit as nicely into a drug trial.
And so, payers might be asking for and demanding these, which get you into doing studies like the ones you've described. They're not necessarily required by a regulatory body.
Right, versus the FDA, there's a specific set of protocols and phase 1, 2, and 3 type tests or trials to get your drug approved.
Right. Yeah, which in and of itself, I think, is an interesting thing to think about, how, do you require via regulation in certain cases, or in some ways the market requires it's right beyond, and so the market takes care of it, which is inevitably kind of the classic healthcare debate about.
That's why I think what most of the folks in our business who want to be here for the long haul, I think we want to be proactive at getting the data analyzed to prove to people that these genetic tests that you're paying for do improve the outcome.